The prairie wind whispered through the slats of Clayton Morse's porch, rustling the dry leaves and carrying the scent of blood. The boy lay crumpled in the dirt beyond his fence, arrows still lodged deep in his shoulder and thigh. He wasn't moving much, just shallow breaths and the occasional twitch of pain. Clayton stood over him, rifle gripped tight in his weathered hands. At 45, he'd learned when to turn his back on trouble, and this was trouble painted in war colors and stitched into buckskin. Helping one of them meant signing your own death warrant. The other ranchers had made that brutally clear over the years. Out here, compassion was weakness, and weakness was punished. His fingers tightened on the stock of the rifle. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to turn around, shut the door, and let the desert take care of it. But the boy couldn't be more than 16, and his eyes, dark, desperate, searching, caught Clayton's across the dusty 20-foot stretch of no man's land. Something in that look pierced through him more than the arrows ever could. It reminded him of eyes he used to know, eyes he used to love. His son would have been about that age now. Had the fever not taken him 3 winters back. Clayton's breath caught. He cursed under it, jaw tight, and set the rifle against the porch rail. Each step toward the boy felt heavier than the last, like he was walking through the judgment of every neighbor he'd ever had. The boy flinched, tried to crawl backward, but his body gave out halfway through the attempt. Easy now, Clayton said, lowering himself beside him. I'm not going to hurt you. The boy's buckskin shirt was soaked through, dark red where blood had seeped across his chest and leg. The arrow shafts had been snapped off short, maybe in a panicked escape, maybe by someone else trying to help. They hadn't hit anything fatal, at least not yet. But that wouldn't matter if he bled out before morning. The boy mumbled something in his own tongue, words Clayton didn't know, but didn't need to. The fear in them was clear. He was begging not to be finished off. What's your name, son? Clayton asked, already slipping an arm under his back. Ka, the boy breathed, voice thin and ragged. He was lighter than Clayton expected. Starved, probably, malnourished, like a coyote cub left to long from its mother. He half-carried, half-dragged Ka up to the porch, and as they reached the steps, something caught his eye that made his blood run colder than the mountain snow. Fresh horse tracks in the mud, multiple riders, bareback. They'd been here, watching inside. Clayton laid Ka down on the kitchen table, lighting every lamp he owned. Shadows jumped in the corners of the room, but he needed light, needed to see what he was dealing with. The arrows had to come out, and fast. But the bigger problem was outside. Movement flickered at the edge of the tree line. Shapes, shifting shadows. He wasn't alone. Ka grabbed his wrist suddenly, with more strength than a dying boy should have had. His eyes blazed with panic as he repeated one word over and over. Washu, Washiku. Clayton didn't speak his language, but the urgency wasn't hard to miss. What's that mean? He asked, voice tight. Ka's gaze flicked toward the window, then back to Clayton's. The way he said the word, it wasn't anger, it was warning. White men. He wasn't afraid of Clayton. He was afraid for him. Clayton pressed a clean cloth to Ka's wound, trying to staunch the blood. The boy flinched, but didn't cry out. His breathing was shallow, labored. Outside, the movement became more deliberate. Silhouettes slipping between the trees, methodical, patient. How many were out there? 5, 10, he couldn't tell anymore. There. Your people, Clayton whispered, not expecting an answer. Why are you warning me? Ka pointed to the window again, then drew a line across his throat. Message received. Clayton had heard the stories. All the ranchers had. Natives didn't come to talk when they found one of their own in settler hands. They came to burn and avenge, to leave nothing behind but ash and bones. But this didn't feel like vengeance. Not yet. Clayton kept working. His hands moved on instinct, cutting away the shirt, checking for hidden wounds. He'd done this before, long ago, in muddy war tents with bullets still hot and screaming. That was before he'd tried his hand at ranching, before he'd buried his wife and lost his only son. He knew what a kill looked like. This wasn't a this was a test. A soft whistle echoed outside. Another followed it, different direction. They were communicating, coordinating. Clayton froze, listening. 3 long whistles, too short. Then silence. Ka's hand brushed his again, gentle, almost grateful this time. His lips parted. "You could have left me," he said softly. "Yeah," Clayton replied, threading a needle. "I could have. Why didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. The needle hovered over skin and memory. His neighbors would call him a fool. The law would brand him a traitor. Survival whispered to walk away. "Had a son once," he finally said. "Your age." Another whistle. Closer. Maybe 50 yards. They were surrounding the cabin now, circling like wolves deciding when to pounce. "Will they attack?" Clayton asked. Ka closed his eyes, face tight with pain. "Depends on what? On whether they think you're like the others." Clayton didn't need to ask what that meant. Too many settlers out here shot first. Too many stories about burned barns and stolen cattle. But there were just as many untold stories, broken treaties, poisoned streams, massacred families. He slipped the needle, cursed. His hands weren't steady anymore. "What's the difference?" he asked, voice raw. "Between me and the others." Ka opened his eyes again. "The others would never have brought me inside." Outside, another sound broke the stillness, the soft nickering of horses, not the quiet tread of native ponies. These were heavier, faster, iron-shod hooves tearing across packed dirt. Riders. Ka tried to sit up, panic flashing across his face. "How many?" Clayton ducked low, peering through the window. Torches flickered in the distance. "For riders, maybe 5. My neighbors." He muttered. Must have seen the light. Now it was more than a rescue. It was a standoff. White men outside, armed and angry. Warriors in the shadows, watching, waiting. Ka bleeding on his table. And Clayton stuck in the middle. The torches grew closer. Voices carried. "Missing cattle. Followed the blood. Send a message. Hide," Clayton whispered. But Ka shook his head. "They smell blood. They come looking." He was right. The scent of blood was thick now, metallic, sharp, mixed with the smoke from the lamps and dried herbs. Anyone stepping inside would know exactly what happened here. Clayton grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. "If you give me to them," Ka said behind him, "the warriors will remember. They weren't just there to rescue. They were bearing witness." 3 sharp knocks on the door. "Clayton, open up." Jeremiah Hole, his closest neighbor, his loudest critic. Clayton opened the door and stepped out, pulling it shut behind him. 4 men on horseback, torches flickering in their hands, all armed, all grim. "Evening, Jeremiah," Clayton said. "What brings you out so late?" "Blood trail," Jeremiah replied. "Starts 2 miles south. Hutchins' cattle scattered to hell. Trail leads right to your fence." Clayton shifted, blocking their view of the cabin. "Haven't seen anything," he lied. "Been inside most the night." The horses fidgeted beneath the men. They knew something was off. "Mind if we take a look around?" Jeremiah asked, already starting to dismount. "Actually, I do mind." The air grew colder, tighter. "You always were too soft." Boone Rollins sneered. "Even back when you had a family." Clayton's jaw clenched. Then THWIP. An arrow landed at Jeremiah's horse's feet. Another struck the fence post beside Boone's head. The message was written in silence. "Leave." Horses reared, panicked. Riders shouted. "Ambush," Boone cried. "No." Clayton barked, stepping between the rifles and the trees, warning. "They just shot at us." "No. They shot past you." "Precision. Discipline. Mercy." Jeremiah's rifle pointed at Clayton. "Step aside, or I'll assume you're with them." Behind Clayton lay the bleeding boy. Around him, warriors watched. He was the last thread keeping this valley from exploding. "Your boy Marcus is 16 now, right?" he asked quietly. Jeremiah blinked. "What? If Marcus was out there, bleeding in the dirt, and strangers found him, what would you want them to do?" "That's different." "No," Clayton said. "It's not." He looked each man in the eye. "He's somebody's son." Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the restless horses. Clayton waited. So did the warriors. So did history. Then Boone broke the silence, his voice sharp with rising panic. "Enough of this. If you won't move, we'll go through you." The young rancher jerked his pistol free from its holster. But before he could lift it, an arrow shrieked through the dark. It sliced cleanly across the leather strap at his waist, knocking the weapon from his hand with surgical precision. The revolver hit the dirt with a dull thud. Boone froze, staring at it like it had betrayed him. The message was unmistakable. We can disarm you whenever we choose. Jesus Christ. Someone muttered behind him, the words trembling with a fear they could no longer hide. Clayton seized the moment. You need to leave. Now, all of you. They'll follow us home, Jeremiah said, his voice drained of all the bluster it held before. He sounded hollow now, brittle with the weight of understanding just how outmatched they were. No, Clayton replied, though even he wasn't sure. He was betting everything on his gut that the warriors out there were here to protect their own, not to start a war. But if he was wrong, if this was the opening volley in something far worse, then he had just signed death warrants for everyone in the valley. Jeremiah studied him for a long moment, his rifle held loose at his side. Then, with a sharp exhale, he lowered it. You're making a mistake, Clayton. When word of this gets out, let me worry about that. One by one, the other riders holstered their weapons and turned their horses around, faces grim in the flickering torchlight. But as they began to retreat, Boone twisted in his saddle and shouted over his shoulder, "Next time we come, we'll bring the whole damn territory, and we won't be asking permission." Clayton watched them ride away, torches shrinking into distant stars across the dark prairie. Only when the final hoof beats had faded into silence did he let himself breathe. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Ka stood in the doorway, pale but steady. His skin was waxy from blood loss, but his eyes were sharp. "You could have died," the boy said. Simply, "Yeah," Clayton replied. "So could you." A sound stirred from the edge of the darkness, slow, deliberate footsteps rustling through the grass. No effort was made to hide them. Someone was approaching. A lone figure emerged beyond the fence, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the ease of someone who'd spent his life walking wild land. War paint marked his weathered face in intricate, unfamiliar patterns. Eagle feathers hung from his long black hair, swaying with each step. The other warriors remained hidden, silent shadows among the trees. But this man stepped boldly into the open. Ka straightened, wincing, and spoke in his native tongue, the words, rapid and full of urgency. The older warrior listened, unmoving, his dark eyes locked on Clayton's face the entire time. When Ka finished, the silence between the three of them felt like a wire stretched to the breaking point. "You are Clayton Morse, the warrior," said in English, clear, accented, precise. "I am," Clayton answered. "I'm Takakota," the man said, gesturing to Ka. "This boy is my sister's son." Clayton nodded, uncertain what to say. "My nephew tells me." Takakota continued, "You chose to help, not harm." "I did," Clayton replied quietly, aware of the eyes still watching from the woods, of the tense balance they were all standing on. "The men who came," Takakota said, his tone turning colder. "They wanted to take him. They wanted to hang him," Clayton corrected. "Or worse." Takakota's face didn't change, but something in his eyes deepened. "And you stopped them." "I asked them to leave," Clayton said, heat prickling his neck, with arrows at their backs. "I did not ask for your help," Takakota said as he stepped closer. Now Clayton could see the detailed beadwork on the man's vest, the faint scars on his arms, the quiet weight of authority he carried without needing to raise his voice. "But you gave it." "Why?" Clayton thought of his son, of the small grave under the oak tree behind the house, of the promises whispered to a headstone through clenched teeth and weeping eyes, of the kind of man he swore he'd become, one his boy might have been proud of, because it was right. Clayton said simply. Takakota studied him for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "My nephew said the same," he murmured, "that you could have let him die, but you brought him inside, fed him, treated his wounds. Any decent man would have done the same." "No," Takakota said firmly, "most would not. We have learned this." Ka muttered something, his voice low, pained. Takakota turned and listened, then looked back at Clayton with a gravity that settled deep in the bones. "He says you lost a son." Clayton's throat closed. 3 years ago," he said hoarsely. "Fever. Took a lot of kids that winter. We lost children too," Takakota replied, his voice heavy with old sorrow. "Disease does not ask what color your skin is." Clayton nodded, unable to speak. "If you were Clayton," Takakota asked, What would you do next, would he? Accept their thanks and pray they left peacefully? Or ask them to stay to protect the wounded boy until he could stand again? But before Clayton could answer, Takakota reached into a leather pouch at his waist and withdrew something small. A carved eagle, no larger than a thumb, polished smooth by time and care. "This belonged to my nephew's father," he said. "A brave man who died protecting our village from soldiers." He stepped forward and pressed the carving into Clayton's hand. "He would want you to have it." The weight of it was heavier than stone. Clayton understood what it meant. It was more than gratitude, it was a symbol of trust between men, born to opposite sides of a bleeding divide. But just as Clayton opened his mouth to respond, distant gunfire rolled across the valley. 3 sharp reports echoed from the direction Jeremiah and his men had ridden, followed by angry shouts and then nothing. Takakota's head snapped toward the sound, body tensing like a predator. From the darkness, Clayton could hear the soft shuffle of warriors shifting positions. "What was that?" he asked, though his heart already knew. Takakota closed his eyes, listening deeper than Clayton could ever hope to. Then he opened them again, and his voice dropped to a growl. "More riders. Many more." Ka tried to stand, but his legs wobbled. Beneath him, "We brought this on you," he said, shame in his voice. "We should go." "You're not going anywhere," Clayton said sharply. "Not with those wounds. You'd bleed out before you reached the trees." The sound of hooves was louder now, not for this time, but dozens. The lights of torches shimmered like a burning constellation, drawing fast toward Clayton's land. "How many men can your neighbors gather?" Takakota asked. 20, maybe 30, all armed." "And how many warriors do you think I brought?" "I counted maybe 8, 10, 15. Takakota said grimly. "But numbers won't matter if they came for blood." Clayton felt the dread seep in. He'd made his choice, but now others' innocence would pay for it. If shooting started, people would die on both sides. The fragile peace this valley held would collapse into generations of vengeance and hate. "There has to be another way," he muttered. "What do you suggest?" Takakota asked. "Your people believe we took their cattle, that we attacked them in the dark. They will not hear words." Clayton's eyes snapped to the riders. He could now make out faces. Jeremiah, Boone, men from distant settlements who'd ridden hard to answer the call. The entire territory had come to his doorstep. "They want justice," he said. "They want blood." Takakota corrected. Ka pushed away from the doorframe, wobbling but upright. "Uncle, there's something you should know about the cattle." Both men turned to him. "We didn't take them," Ka said. "But I know who did." Clayton's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "White men. 3, maybe 4. We saw them 2 days ago. They drove the herd north, toward the mining camps." "Why didn't you tell the ranchers?" Ka laughed bitterly. "Would they have believed me? Or said I was lying to protect my people?" He had a point. "Can you prove it?" Takakota asked. "The tracks are still there if the rain hasn't washed them. And I shot one of them. Big man. Red beard." Clayton's heart dropped. "Red McKinnon, you know him?" Takakota asked. Clayton nodded grimly. "Rustler, killer, wanted in 3 territories. He's been stirring conflict between settlers and natives to cover his thefts." And now the full truth began to bloom. McKinnon's gang had stolen cattle and framed the natives. They sold livestock to distant mining camps while the ranchers blamed the tribes. The perfect crime, no questions, no witnesses, no consequences. The riders reached the fence line. 37 men, armed to the teeth. Jeremiah raised a hand, and the group halted just outside arrow range. "Clayton Morse," he bellowed. "We know you're harboring hostiles. Send them out and maybe we let you live." Clayton stepped forward, the carved eagle still in his hand, and felt the eyes of 15 warriors burning through the darkness behind him. "Two worlds balanced on a trigger. I've got something to tell you," he shouted, "about your missing cattle." But already the riders were spreading out, forming a wide circle around his land. "Your cattle weren't taken by natives," Clayton continued. "They were taken by Red McKinnon's gang." Jeremiah rode forward, torchlight glinting off his rifle. "That's mighty convenient, Clayton. The boy I'm helping saw it happen. He can describe them, the route they took, everything." "The word of a savage," Boone spat. "That's what you bring us." Clayton could see the doubt stirring in some of the men's eyes, but words weren't enough anymore. Takakota stepped into the open, into the full wash of firelight, and raised his voice. "I am Takakota of the Lakota, leader of these warriors. If you seek war, we will give it. But first, you will hear truth." Weapons wavered in the crowd, some raised, some lowering. Jeremiah held up a hand. "Speak, but make it quick." Takakota's voice rolled steady and firm. 3 suns ago, my nephew saw white men driving stolen cattle north. One had a red beard. My nephew shot him. Red McKinnon, someone in the crowd murmured. "Shut up, Davies," Boone growled. But Clayton saw it. Doubt, truth clawing its way through fury. "Check the mining camps," Takakota continued. "You will find your cattle there branded, stolen and sold." Jeremiah scowled. "Even if that's true, you're trespassing on our land." "We came only to retrieve our wounded," Takakota said, his voice firm yet calm, cutting through the crackling tension like a knife through taut rope. "This man," he gestured toward Clayton, "shows mercy over hatred. He could have left my nephew to die. Instead, he brought him into his home, tended his wounds, and risked his life to shield him from harm." Clayton could feel the weight of 100 stares pressing down on him, hostile settlers glaring through the darkness, and unseen warriors watching from the tree line. Everything now balanced on the threadbare edge of what happened next. "Why should we believe any of this?" Boone spat, his voice brittle with frustration and fear. Before anyone could speak, the thundering sound of hooves came from the north. One rider, moving fast, his horse driving forward with the frantic urgency of news that couldn't wait. The figure burst into the torchlight, the horse slick with sweat, breathing hard. It was Tom Davies, face flushed, eyes wide. "Jeremiah," he called out, pulling hard on the reins. "Found tracks heading north, just like they said. And there's blood on the rocks. Looks like someone got hit with an arrow." A suffocating silence followed. Jeremiah sat frozen atop his horse, jaw clenched, eyes locked on Clayton. Round him, the other riders shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. The certainty that had driven them here, the belief that they'd been wronged by savages, was beginning to crack. That could be coincidence, Boone muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Or it could be proof, Clayton replied, his voice low and firm. "Question is, are you ready to start a war over maybe being wrong?" Takakota stepped forward, closer to the fence, and his voice carried like a drumbeat through the quiet night. "I propose this: send your men to the mining camps. If you find your cattle there, sold by white thieves, then you'll know the truth. If not," he lifted his shoulders in a slow shrug, "then we will face whatever justice you see fit." "And in the meantime," Jeremiah asked, squinting through the flickering light, "in the meantime, my nephew heals here, under this man's care," Takakota replied. "When he's strong enough to ride, we'll leave your territory. We won't return." Clayton watched the war play out behind Jeremiah's eyes, the logic of Takakota's offer, pitted against years of stoked fear and simmering rage. And then, from the cabin, Ka stepped into view, pale and trembling, but upright. He leaned against the doorframe, his shoulders squared with quiet dignity. Even in the dancing shadows of torchlight, the boy's youth was unmistakable. He wasn't a warrior. He was barely more than a child. "This," Clayton said, motioning toward Ka, his voice quiet and steady. "This is who you came to kill?" "A wounded boy." The question floated there, heavy as smoke, choking the breath from the night. Slowly, the guns began to lower. Jeremiah was the first to holster his weapon, and the gesture swept like wind through a field, riders following his lead, one by one. Not all of them. Boone and a few others still held their rifles tight, knuckles white, eyes hard. But it was enough. The balance had shifted. 3 days, Jeremiah said finally, his voice thick with restraint. "We'll send men to the camps. If we find those cattle, you'll find them," Takakota interrupted gently, a quiet confidence anchoring his words. "And if we don't, then you'll know who to trust." Clayton finished, some of the weight pressing on Clayton's chest eased, but not all. The danger hadn't passed, just shifted. 3 days wasn't much time, and in that time, anything could happen. Boone wasn't done. What's to stop them from raiding more ranches while we're gone? He barked. We leave them here, we're sitting ducks. I'll vouch for them, Clayton said immediately. They'll stay on my land, under my watch. Your word against our safety, Boone sneered. Not much of a guarantee, but Takakota was already ready. Choose 3 men. Let them stay and watch. They can camp where they can see the house. If we break our word, they ride for help. It was a fair offer, and everyone knew it. Jeremiah mulled it over for only a moment, then nodded. Davies, you, Miller, Hutchin, stay here, keep watch. Anyone does something stupid. You ride for town. The 3 men dismounted, none of them eager for the assignment, but obedient nonetheless. They began setting up camp near the edge of Clayton's land, casting suspicious glances toward the cabin and the silent woods beyond. The others turned to leave, some riding alone, some in tight pairs. But every one of them glanced back, some with unease, some with resentment. This better be what you say it is, Clayton, Jeremiah called back, his voice a final warning. Because if it's not, it is, Clayton said, and soon you'll see that. The riders melted into the dark, torches trailing behind them like falling stars. When the last hoof beats faded, only the 3 watchers remained, a small fire glowing beside them. Clayton helped Ka back inside, the boy's legs barely holding him. Meanwhile, Takakota murmured quiet orders to the hidden warriors in the trees. Whatever he said, it was enough. Most of the shadows dissolved into the night, returning to wherever they had waited. Only 2 or 3 remained silent guardians of their own. Inside the cabin, Ka lay curled on the kitchen table, sweat beading on his brow. Clayton resumed tending his wounds while Takakota took a chair by the window, his body still, ears alert, always listening. You think they'll find the cattle? Clayton asked softly. McKinnon's gang is not subtle. Takakota said. They will have left tracks, and a man with a fresh arrow wound and a red beard will not be easily forgotten at the camps. And if they don't find anything? Clayton asked. Takakota was quiet for a long time before he spoke. Then my nephew, and I will face whatever comes. But you should not suffer for showing mercy. Clayton shook his head slowly. We're in this together now. Dawn crept across the sky, soft and golden, spilling over the horizon like a blessing. Clayton had dozed for only minutes, but the rhythm of hooves jolted him upright. He glanced out the window. Riders were coming, but these weren't torch-bearing. Men thirsty for blood. They rode slow, steady men returning from a task completed. Jeremiah dismounted outside the gate and approached the cabin door. His face was unreadable as Clayton opened it. Found them, Jeremiah said, no anger in his tone, only a weary clarity. All of Hutchkin's cattle and stock from 3 other ranches, being sold at McKinnon's mining camp, just like the boy said. Clayton exhaled, a flood of relief washing over him. And McKinnon? He asked, shot trying to escape. Jeremiah said, arrow in the shoulder, still healing, but fresh. Jeremiah's gaze shifted past Clayton to where Ka sat upright on the table. Your aim's pretty good. Boy, Ka nodded solemnly. He was stealing from people who work hard for what they have. Yeah, well, Jeremiah hesitated, words heavy on his tongue. Looks like we owe you, all of you, an apology. Takakota rose and joined them at the doorway. Apologies are not necessary, he said. Only understanding. Over the next hour, more riders returned, confirming what Jeremiah had said. Territorial authorities were now pursuing the rest of McKinnon's gang. The cattle thefts had been exposed for what they were. The danger had passed. But something deeper had shifted, something harder to name, as Takakota prepared to leave. With his nephew, who now stood under his own strength, he paused in Clayton's doorway. My people have a custom, he said. When someone shows great kindness, we remember. And we honor that memory. I don't need honors, Clayton replied quietly. Perhaps not. But you have earned something more valuable, Takakota said with a nod. Respect between our peoples. The next morning, just as the first light touched the land, Clayton stepped outside to the sound of quiet hoof beats. His yard was filled with silent figures. 15 warriors sat mounted in perfect formation, war paint glowing faintly in the rising sun. At the front rode Takakota, Ka at his side. Upright and proud, As Clayton stepped onto the porch, every warrior raised his right hand in solemn salute, a gesture of respect, of thanks, of something far older than words. They said nothing, but they didn't need to. Then, as gracefully as they had come, they turned their horses and rode into the horizon, toward the blush of dawn. Clayton stood there long after they disappeared, the wind brushing softly through the trees. In his hand, he still held the carved eagle Takakota had pressed into his palm. It was warm from his grip, and for the first time since the fever had taken his son, Clayton Moore smiled. Now, click on the video on your screen because the next story carries something you can't explain, only feel. And when it ends, you won't be the same. Click now.